Did I just really once again record a 20-minute review that I was fully pleased with, not checking once if there is sound? Yes, I did. And since I have to redo it, I will just start it off in the same rambly way and go into the thing that I think we just can't have it all. Like for example, audio in a review, but also not the perfect laptop. And with the Dell XPS 13, Dell just proved that once again. I will go into why I think that is the way, but I'm also gonna say one thing. I said early on in the year that I'm not gonna actually review many laptops because I think they got all so close with pretty much the same specs and you can pick anyone and you will get a solid experience. But I've said that I'm only gonna review the important ones and the interesting ones, and the Dell XPS 13 is both. Interesting because of one choice, but important because all the qualities that I've seen in the previous version, not the previous one, but the one before, because I skipped that, this one has made significant improvements. But let's get to the step back before we get to the big steps forward. No Type A. This is already kind of a TLDR. If you want pretty much the best laptop out there anymore and you can live without Type A, this might be it. You should definitely watch the whole review though. But if you can't, I can't really get over it because as you can see here, it still looks a lot like the previous models. It still looks great, but I think it wasn't necessary to try to make the device like 1 or 2 millimeters thinner and therefore just skip still the most important port. Because they thought, yes, it's a thing of the past, you should get rid of it. Even though I personally don't have a single Type-C device yet. And with dongles, this thing is okay, but if you don't want to use them, it's still a thing. And yes, you get this super nice, but not really. So let's check the ports. We have a lock, not a Kensington though. We have 2 times Thunderbolts, USB Type-C. As you can see here, this one's for charging. We still have the useless button that shows you the battery charge. I don't know why I would need that. I can just open it and see it on my own. Then one of the 2 speakers. Huge improvement here. I'm gonna go into that later. Still the unnecessary LED. It glows until 15%, then it changes orange from white to orange. Did we need that? Because we already have a battery meter here and I don't need it here and it does not do really much more. Maybe notifications or so. I don't really remember. I would have rather seen maybe a cutout to open it, but we have an angle, so that's okay. What's not okay is a micro SD card slot. Why not a full size? When I asked them, they said it's just not a thing that many people ask for, so we included this, but I think either give me full size or give me nothing, because this I won't really use ever. And then the DisplayPort USB Type-C, and this looks a lot like if you would have made the device like a millimeter thicker, there would have been space for a Type A, and they decided just not to do it, but I can change it. And then the headphone jack, the rest though, this is the big part. This device feels so solid by now, the build quality feels better than ever. There is no flex here. We have some nice ventilation, we have the great rubber feet that protect it from sliding. Everything is okay, a little bit on the sharper side on the edges, but it's fine. But it feels actually so dense that even though it's just 1.2 kilograms, sorry for the glare, it feels a little bit on the heavier side. I just have to give it to that, even though it feels so great, it's dense. But something like a Huawei MateBook X, a little bit of a different form factor with a little bit over 1 kilo, feels noticeably lighter. But let's check the inside and yeah, I'm gonna complain about it. We still can't open it with one hand. I don't know why in 2018 this is still a thing. And as you have seen, it actually unlocked without having to press anything because we have the RealSense camera. And I usually never really mention cameras, but this time I will. So that's an improvement, I guess. Otherwise, we have here the fingerprint reader. It works a little bit slower than on phones, but usually it's reliable. And on the inside, nice carbon here. It will get a little bit kind of greasy after a while. There's also a white version, but also we can see super tiny bezels on the sides, a little bit one, a bigger one at the bottom. But this camera, I'll get into that in just a second, because I want to now focus a little bit more on the keyboard actually, because this was one of my big complaints also in the past, that it felt so incredibly dead. And it's hard to explain, but the tactile feedback was just off and it felt so shallow. And when I heard that this one is supposed to be even more shallow with less travel, I thought this is an absolute no-go. But having used it for 3 weeks now, I have to say finally I'm fully pleased, because it does maybe click. So it's more of a quiet keyboard, nicely dampened though. Flex is also not really there, but it's so nice to type on this one. So now it's definitely one of the better ones. Not maybe the best one, but I'm fully pleased. The layout is good. We still have backlight. The one thing that I would have wished for the brightness controls to be on the top bar like they were in the past. So now you have to use 2 fingers, but at least the volume control is still there. So everything else is fine. Trackpad. It is a precision trackpad, which is always nice to see, but it's also a very good one. Not maybe great because even though, for example, scrolling with 2 fingers, as you can see, is nice and smooth and it reacts very well and everything else as well, 3 finger gestures sometimes are a little bit of a hit and miss, at least if you don't hit them properly, but really nice job. So big improvement on the peripherals, but maybe not so much about the camera, because let me zoom out just a little bit once again so we can talk about the cam. Like I said, it is, what was that? It is a real sense camera. So you can unlock your face with it, but now if I actually show the cam, you can see that this angle actually is so weird for the camera that it often just doesn't recognize my face. So this would be something more, whoops. So sometimes you can hit something because the bezels are so small. You can see this is not an angle that the camera can do really much with. So yeah, and then of course, nose hair, we can also see that, but as you can also see here on the display, if I type normally, okay, you type more like this, you see the finger of the person, you see them, and you already see him properly, because if he looks at the cameras, he doesn't look at you. And if you look at him, you don't look into the camera anymore. So this at the top is still way more natural, because if you look at it like this, it feels better. But the quality all in its own already isn't that great. It works, it gets the job done, but that's pretty much already just about that. And that's why I want to actually go into the thing that you've seen the whole time, but I didn't talk about it, the display. This, and it actually looks way better than it is because of the angle. I'm not quite sure why the camera, the lens, makes it look so yellowish, so dull, which is not the case at all, because you can see the numbers. 100% of sRGB, 79% of Adobe RGB. This, by the way, is the touch version with 4K, which has also pretty much perfect gamma level. Gray values are solid. Brightness for a 4K display, a value of 500 with still good black levels and a top contrast. This is a great display. About the white point though, I have to mention that once we go into, for example, now Spider, when I did my measurements, is on the colder side, because if I switch to the calibrated picture now, you can see everything looks way more yellowish. It looks weird though on the camera, I get that. And even though this looks at first weird, I've already calibrated so many monitors and laptops, you will get used to that very soon, and then it just is better, because as you can maybe see here, some things are just fixed. You have a little bit better contrast. You don't have a kind of greenish tint on the screen. But anyone who doesn't have a calibration tool, don't worry, you won't really miss out on anything, because the display, even not calibrated, is still fully pleasing, which actually is this. So this is the non-calibrated picture, as you can see, and white still looks good. It's a little bit cold, but it doesn't matter. Black levels also really good. No light bleed at all. Very important. And then it's a solid black. Sharpness. I always said I'm not a big fan of 4K displays because of scaling, but by now Windows have kind of has improved so much that I don't see scaling as an issue anymore, because if you certain times, if you for example have a legacy app or something where it's either blurry or too small, personally I don't really run into much other than it. Then you get the super sharp crisp 4K display, and it's also glossy on the, which was the thing last year on the 1080p version, but now both versions are glossy. But I personally always prefer glossy for one reason. It is just so much more vibrant. Colors just look way more popping. But for everyone who complains about the fact that it's not glossy anymore, that you don't have the 1080p glossy option, let's just check one thing, and this is something that super much impressed me. Just above me is a light, and yet you see no reflections, which I would have definitely expected what happens on any phone. But if I directly go into this, you can see full power, and it still looks very nice, because the anti-reflective coating here is really good. So even though we have a glossy display, the reflections are actually absolutely moderate. Of course, outside it will be harder to see, but since we also have a very bright display, I don't think the glossiness should be an issue unless you really don't like it at all. And then the next thing would be CABC, which is now finally through the BIOS able to be disabled. Which is such a big thing, believe me, because I've so many times complained about the fact that if I go into darker display content, the display gets dimmer and the contrast changes, and it's just not a good thing. In the past, you had to use a firmware update. You have to wait for that actually if you have to actually find it, which always wasn't all that easy. Now in the BIOS it works without any issues, which is so nice to see. So this, I would say, pretty much is the best possible display that you can get at the moment in terms of overall qualities. Maybe not perfectly calibrated, but very well done. Even though I have to mention the 1080p version, what it will bring along with is better battery life, obviously, even lighter performance in terms of scrolling and so on. And now being glossy, I don't think the issue that I had last year with it looking so dull will be still a thing. And I think 1080p is still good enough. But now let's cover the sound. Did you hear it? No? Exactly, that's my point. Because in the past, Dell XPS, as many other laptops, had the issue that distortion was still a thing due to a metal chassis and then vibrating and so on. Not anymore, not at all. And since we now have side-firing speakers and not something on the bottom, there is also no blocking if you have it on your lap or so it can spread to the side, and on a desk it can still reflect, and just now I would say delivers you the best sound that I've heard on an XPS 13 device. I haven't, like I said, reviewed the previous model, just the one before, and that one still had those distortions. It just didn't sound nearly as good, because what we can also see here with the Wave Max audio software, that we can adjust a few things like details, width, and also max bass, and I just changed a few minor things about the detail and brightness to get a more of a clearer sound. But it's now, which is super important, a very strong sound, because it doesn't feel thin, it doesn't feel kind of canny or tinny or anything like that. So what proves how good this speaker actually is, or these speakers, is that I've used this laptop for 3 weeks without once using it with a Bluetooth speaker, which I usually always tend to, because it gets loud enough for most situations. If you want to just watch a TV show or a YouTube video with good quality, this one will do just fine. And if you don't want to, you can also use the headphone jack, that also delivers a really good quality because it's quite loud, a little bit sounded towards the warmer, richer side, but you can adjust it on your own, so all good here. So now let's get into the performance, and this looks super promising with 3 gigabytes per second of read speeds, but why just 450? I just don't get that. That should have been a higher level, and with especially this level, you would have expected for amazingly fast boot up times, which is just not the case, and I mostly blame the BIOS for. The BIOS great because you can disable CAVC now and such, but it takes like 10 to 12 seconds just to get past the BIOS, and then like about 18 to 20 seconds until we are finally in the system. So from cold boot, it's 18 to 20, not plus the 10 of the BIOS. So it's like 10, 12 seconds BIOS and then 6 more for the system, which is the time though, 6 seconds, which the best laptops that I've reviewed managed to boot up cold. I would say a good average for the high-end ones, 8 seconds, and many can do it at 10. Why this one needs longer than ever before, I don't get. Yeah, but otherwise in terms of performance. Mentioning the 4K display, I said already that the performance won't be quite as good as you can see here, because if I scroll with touch, there is a little bit of a delay, and after all, having to push so many pixels is a little bit taxing. Even though we have the quad-core, it's still just not a full quad-core after all. But as you can see here, with the touchpad, it works super smooth. And if you don't scroll all the time, which I don't think many will do here through the screen, you should have no issues. And that just leads me to the fact, of course, multitasking works fine. You can still switch, and everything feels nice and light and everything. But there is no denying that once we go for the 1080p display, especially the scrolling will feel even lighter, and it just is a little bit less taxing on the GPU and such. But this already leads me to the one thing. It's still just integrated graphics, and I've said it already so many times when people ask me why I don't test the gaming. I just don't test gaming on a device without discrete graphics, because yes, it's possible now with the quad-core better than ever, but it's still not much more than, for example, super old kind of light games at 720p. That's the thing. But if you have integrated graphics, or you need that for video editing, go for something with an MX150, because even though this now with the quad core allows for way better video editing and photo editing and whatever you want to do now than before, because we've seen benchmarks where the quad core now compared to the dual core is like 50, 60, 70% faster, it's still a low voltage CPU, but you can get everything done. But for someone who wants to video edit more on a regular base than just on an occasional base, go for something with discrete graphics. You will definitely be satisfied way more of it, but it gets the job done. If it's just on the go, you're okay. Personally, I'm spoiled by my Threadripper 16 cores, but nice. And since every other task is already handled by 2 cores very well, this is fine. So I'm not gonna go much into further. For what this is, because after all, it's not a video editing machine, after all, it's not a gaming machine, it does the job more than just super pleasing. But super pleasing is also one thing that I did not expect to be that noise and heat. Because noise, let's talk about coil whine. Usually, if I go very close to my ears, I hear every time coil whine, especially on Dell XPS devices. They were infamous there for normal use. I did not notice anything. And that's why I'm not even going to mention it in terms of a negative thing, because I'm sure if I go maybe super close and if I do something, I will maybe hear a little bit. But in my 3 weeks, I never in normal use, in a normal environment, notice it, and that's why it's not there. And of course, that could be though unit dependable, because maybe this one doesn't have it and another one has it. But let's get to the temperatures, and you can already actually see these here, because this device actually for some reason doesn't even get warm. On load, of course, temperature of 22 ambient, which isn't super hot. Temperature stayed very nice, because 42 at the bottom, you won't burn off your lap, and 32 at the top, you won't burn your fingers. So all is done here. And even though 85 Celsius max seems a lot, that is just the maximum, because on average we were at 73. And I just have to say, this along with the new cooling or whatever they did to it now, of course, with the CPUs being more efficient than ever, it is a super quiet machine. Because in my normal use, video, whatever, this thing was dead silent. The fan didn't turn on once. Of course, in the summer with at least 10 degrees more here, especially in the studio, it might be a thing. But I'm not quite sure how much of a difference this will make, because I've done a stress test for half an hour. And the CPU didn't drop more than like 100 or 200% from its maximum state. But the fan stayed so subtle, with a very high quality soothing sound. It never got annoying or high pitch or anything. It sounded very subtle, not ever loud. And I don't get how they did it, because the previous ones were always known for often cranking up the fans for no proper reason, and then there was a very annoying sound. Not anymore. So they improved not just the temps, but also the noise heavily. I'm super pleased. Battery life, that's where I'm not so super pleased, because 2.5 hours full charge is a little bit longer than some other ones, but therefore it doesn't put so much stress on the battery, so it should be good for a long period of time, since you can't really replace it all that easy, but it's still okay. Battery life, I would say, is more than solid enough for me, because with a brightness that I used fixed it all the time at 40%, which is a little bit like maybe over 200 lux, I got a little bit over 6 hours on average. So somewhere in between 6.5, closer to 6, which was my average. I could go a little bit higher, especially if I would do more office stuff and so on. But with the usual tasks that I always do and the drain that I know from my experience, I can tell you that you should expect at least 1, if not 1.5, if not maybe even 2 hours more if you also lose maybe lower brightness. So that's a good value. If I get 6 solid hours, that gets me through the day, and I'm super happy. And this is just about the threshold where I'm saying this is very good battery life, because it gets me through the day. Otherwise, I would have to maybe think about it. But you having even an hour more, it should be even easier. Now, if that's not enough for you, like I said, go for the 1080p version, because that one, I would say, will bring you at least 1.5 hours more. That's just one where I know from experience from the previous devices, even though efficiency has changed. But which is actually the super important part. This now gives me 6 hours of screen on time, where the last version that I had with a higher res display from the Dell XPS 14 line, the 3200 by 1800 resolution, gave me like 4 hours, maybe 4.5. So this means that this device just got more efficient. You get 1.5 to 2 hours more of use, and it's way more powerful with the quad core now. So win, win, win. Now, performance-wise, not really too much to say here, because yes, we had McAfee installed, which is something I would get rid of very quickly. But other than that, like I said, the Wavemax audio software, the rest is pretty much okay. You have the typical kind of Dell bloat, like a few Aptra experts. You can get rid of all of them, so no problem here. office trials and such. One thing that is quite handy though is the Dell update software. Whenever you get a firmware update or a driver update, you get notified, and that's fine. Which now brings me actually to the conclusion after 20 minutes, where my actual review was just 20 minutes long. So where did I take up so much more time? I don't know, but let's get through all the categories once again. Design, I like it. It's a little bit on the perceived heavier side, but it's really well done, super solid, no flex at all. But then there is the big issue, the big step backwards: no Type A. And like I said, and if you have seen the review, you know, if you don't need Type A, this device will suit you superb. But if you need it, and I can't hammer that enough for that, because I think it's a dumb decision in my opinion, because you alienate a lot of people. I've seen already so many people in the comments telling me that they won't get it because this is a deal breaker, and I kind of agree. Next thing though, what they improved a lot that I did not expect to be improved that much. It's not a trackpad, which is a little bit better, but it's the keyboard. I never really liked the dead feeling keyboard. Now it's great. The display is better than ever. The speaker is better than ever. The performance is better than ever. And compared to the resolution in relation, also the battery life is better than ever. Which, as you can see, means a lot of good things about it. Also noise and heat. So compared to the version that I've reviewed the last time, which was not the previous quad core version, but the one before, this is improved in actually so many aspects. Like I said, design maybe not really that much. It got a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner, but peripherals, display, speaker, performance, battery life, everything got better. Besides the one thing that got worse. So multiple steps forward, one big one, the port A. So if you don't need it, this device will be super pleasing. If you need it, then maybe go check something like the MateBook X Pro that I'm also going to review, because it's not much bigger, has still the Type A port and a lot of other good qualities. But I have to say they did a great job compared to the previous versions now, where I still had gripes over obviously the things that improved now. This now is kind of the complete package. Almost. Dell, why did you think you have to be so smart? But so dumb. Okay, so this was it. Now with sound, I'm good. And I hope you are too. If you want something else, comments. Otherwise, wish you a nice day. Until next time.